A little bit about the Regional Council. The Greater Nashville Regional Council, the place I have an honor of working, is a literal council that I hope you know about. But the Regional Council as an agency was established in 1965 by the Tennessee General Assembly as one of 9 economic development districts in the state of Tennessee. We represent 13 counties here in northern Middle Tennessee. And on that physical regional council are the local mayors from the municipalities and the county mayors and the county executives from the communities across those 13 counties sort of come together to form a regional council. They're joined by 2 members of the state legislature who sit on that council. And then county mayors across the region are empowered to appoint 2 citizens from their county. 1 citizen to represent issues of social equity and inclusion, and 1 citizen to represent issues of business and commerce. So altogether, we have 93 members of our regional council. It's a large board. We have a much smaller board called the executive board that represents all the counties across the region which meets monthly. And I guess if I were to, a lot of people know GNRC through the programs and services we provide, which are pretty disparate. I guess if there's one key takeaway of what I'd like you to know about our organization is essentially we're a regional council of governments that has been empowered by state and federal law to convene local leaders across Middle Tennessee to cooperatively develop policies that affect quality of life and to prioritize public funding for infrastructure projects, community development, and social services. So in a second, I'll give you a sense of what that looks like. But our programs and services will change over time as the interests of the region and the state and the nation do. So we're here really to support the collaboration among these communities who are empowered to decide together how to direct federal and to some extent state funds into infrastructure and social services across Middle Tennessee. I want to give a shout out to Mayor Paige Brown, City of Gallatin, who is our current president. I think she's online with us. Mayor Ryle out of Dixon County is our vice president. Joe Pitts up in Clarksville is our vice president. And our immediate past president is Anthony Holthus, Sumner County Mayor. In terms of sort of our geography and our impact, the things that we do every day from providing grants for improving housing conditions or developing arts programs or going inside the homes of senior adults to improve their quality of life. That impact is really seen across the region. A lot of our focus is obviously in the urban area where we see tremendous amounts of population, but our reach is far and wide and deeply rooted in a lot of the rural communities across the area. We serve as a bridge between those local governments and state and federal resources to improve quality of life within their region. And behind that work are 80 professionals who are the staff of the Greater Nashville Regional Council to that 93-member board. We're made up of social workers and counselors and economic development specialists, community development specialists. We do small business lending. We have geographers, researchers, policy analysts, volunteer coordinators, communications and marketing experts. And so we're pretty diverse staff who are just really eager and ready to do the bidding of regional leadership on whatever issue is important to Middle Tennessee. If you are interested in learning more about us, if this is your introduction to our organization, I invite you to go to gnrc.org/annual report for a look at how the work that we did back in 2019 manifested across Middle Tennessee. This is a great publication that will really inform you about the opportunities that you would have in your own space to collaborate with the Regional Council. So tonight, we're focused on transportation, so let me connect the Greater Nashville Regional Council to efforts to plan transportation across Middle Tennessee. So GNRC has the honor of being designated by the federal government and by the state government in several official roles that ultimately are responsible for prioritizing and programming federal funds to improve quality of life. We're the Economic Development District as designated by the Department of Commerce out of DC. And so in that role, we prioritize funding for investments in infrastructure by the Department of Commerce. We're the Area Agency on Aging and Disability, which is a health and human services related function. And at the state level, it's the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disability And so we work with the state and federal partners there to prioritize state and federal investments into services that help improve quality of life for older adults across the region. We're a certified development company by the U.S. Small Business Administration. So we, in support of our economic development efforts, issue and help support small business lending across Middle Tennessee for those that are looking to recruit or expand their local businesses to sort of recruit or retain jobs here in Middle Tennessee. We're also the Middle Tennessee Tourism Council for the purposes of coordinating decisions about tourism marketing, and that's a cooperative effort with the Tennessee State Tourist Development Office. The designation that matters most for tonight is that we're the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for 7 counties within Tennessee. And in this role, that MPO, which we call the Transportation Policy Board, is empowered by federal law to cooperatively prioritize and program the federal gas tax money and some general funds at the federal level that get sent back to the states. And so this Transportation Policy Board has an extremely important role in deciding how our federal funds are used on roadway, transit, walking, biking investments across Middle Tennessee. Serving on that board is the Tennessee governor, typically via the TDOT leadership, and each municipal and county mayor within the 7 counties you see in that list. We also have a representative from public transit agencies, and that's currently Steve Bland with WeGo Public Transit, a representative of area county highway officials, and that's currently Eddie Hood with the Williamson County Highway Department. And then the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration are also on that board to be a resource to the local and state partners who are trying to move the needle on transportation. And so that is sort of why why we're here tonight is that this policy board, in order to prioritize and program these federal funds, they do this through the Regional Transportation Plan, which is updated every 5 years. And so we're here tonight to preview that proposed update for you. And to kick us off, it's really an honor to introduce one of my favorite mayors in Middle Tennessee, if not my favorite mayor, Mary Esther Reed out of the town of Smyrna, for her perspective on the importance of regional collaboration on the transportation issue.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, I'm so glad to see your kitchen, because my husband would say that I don't know what a kitchen really is. So I'm finally glad to get to see one. Michael, I want to thank you for all the work you've done and for all that your staff has done. I can't tell you all that are on the call how much time that they have put into not only the proposal we're going to talk about tonight, but everything that they've done. And to know that they've been doing that while they've been having to be at home is amazing, that they have been able to get it all done. Tell you a little bit about myself. I've lived in Smyrna my entire life. I've seen Smyrna go from 4,500 people to 50,000. I've also seen your communities grow as well. There's so many positive things that come with growth, but there's also some hurdles that we have to overcome. And that's why I'm here. I'm here representing my community, the town of Smyrna, but I'm also here representing city and county mayors who serve on our regional council's Transportation Policy Board. And some of you might know the Transportation Policy Board by its federal designation, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or the MPO, for Nashville and our surrounding counties. Michael told you a little bit about the Transportation Policy Board, and that we're empowered by federal law to serve as the primary forum for collaboration among the local and the state officials, for us to be able to negotiate a mutually beneficial plan. This is where we invest in our roadways, our bridges, our public transit, all across the Middle Tennessee region. Now, in 2016, our board adopted the current transportation plan to direct more than $8.5 billion in federal grants and matching funds into our area's transportation system through the year 2040. And I bet you didn't realize that in October of 2019, we voted to approve about $1 billion of funding to be put to work across our area between now and 2023. But as you all know, every plan has a shelf life, and hopefully that plan gets taken off the shelf every once in a while and looked at. And I will tell you that the plans that our board puts together are things that are definitely our guideline that we continually go back to and use. And looking at the plan is why we're here today. We're here to share our proposed updated 2016 plan. And since then, our markets have shifted. We've had additional issues have come up. We've had new tools that have been developed, and more people want to be involved in the process. For some of you, you will remember back in October of 2019, we launched an initiative that was called the Solve This Together at our regional convening of more than 200 community leaders. And we laid out a strategy for updating our plan. That day, I called on local and state leadership. And I will tell you, I was so excited when we left that day. I felt everybody was on the same page. We were all ready to move forward. And we talked about 5 different things. I kind of want to talk a little bit about the 5 key things that we want to talk about. One was working together across political boundaries, levels of government, socioeconomic groups, and economic sectors to identify a shared vision for our region. The second thing was to be ready to prioritize transportation needs based on real world constraints and the limitations in which we all have. But we had to be willing to negotiate and to execute our strategies to overcome the obstacles that I talked about earlier. And we needed to do this to make sure we are able to get things done. The third thing we talked about was to keep in mind that we're all working to make Middle Tennessee a place that our children and grandchildren want to call home. And I will tell you, sitting on the council in the town of Smyrna, that's something I talk about a lot. I want individuals that grow up here and individuals that move here, I want them to want to stay here. And we all have immediate needs that have to be addressed, but we must tackle these in a way that's incremental to our long-range plans. The fourth thing that I talked about was thinking comprehensively about the relationship between our transportation decisions and those related to housing, the economy and jobs, land use and community design, environmental quality, the historic preservation, social services, and other issues that are important to all of us here in Middle Tennessee. The fifth thing is to have fun. No matter what we're doing, we always can have a good time in doing it. And I understand that there is absolutely a sense of urgency and the frustration with the lack of resources and the anxiety about getting out of our comfort zones. But we should be inspired by the challenges and not afraid of them. And I will tell you, that's something that our board talks about and really does each meeting. Now, back then, on that day, I talked about the energy and how excited I was. And then little did we know what would happen in a few short months. 2020 happened. I don't know if you all remember 2020. For a lot of us, it's a time that we want to forget. But that was another one of those hurdles that I was talking about. While traffic congestion and roadway safety and other transportation issues have always been a top priority of the region for the last several years, I know firsthand that your mayors in your towns, in your communities, have spent the last several months doing everything we can to address public health and economic concerns that were related to COVID-19. That's not to say transportation went away. It's just to say that there were some other focuses that we had at last year. But in response to the pandemic, the Transportation Policy Board agreed that while we needed to continue our work on the transportation plan to keep federal grants flowing into our communities and into our region, We also needed to start thinking about what's the best way to engage the public and the stakeholders in a meaningful conversation that transportation, what it's going to look like in the post-pandemic world. And so as you learn more about the proposed update of the Regional Transportation Plan tonight, I want you to know two things. One, we're proud of the work that has been done over the last year during some really, really challenging times. And two, we have a lot more work that needs to be done in order to solve the long-term transportation challenges. I think sometimes my council gets tired of hearing me say this, but none of us live in a bubble. None of our communities function in a bubble or just inside of our own city limits. We're all in this together. That's why myself and the other mayors on the Transportation Policy Board are eager to continue the work and working together and our collaboration with each one of you to solve this long-term transportation challenges that we all face. I'm really, really appreciative that you've taken the time tonight to be with us, that you're going to provide feedback, and I want you to know how excited we still are about the opportunities we have here in the Middle Tennessee region. I know that for a lot of us, the growth has brought some hurdles, but I will tell you, we are very blessed to live in the communities that we do, and I appreciate each one of you. And Michael, with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thanks for being with us. Please stick around as long as you're able to do so tonight. I know you've got things to do back in the town of Smyrna. But thanks for being with us. At this point, I'd love to introduce our new Director of Community Regional Planning to share with you the trends and issues that we have been engaged in conversations about with the constituents across Middle Tennessee. And so with that, Jessica Hill, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Mayor Reed, for those great introductions. And good evening, everyone. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the top issues and major trends we identified through the Regional Transportation Plan update. And I want you to know that we started by listening to understand the needs of Middle Tennessee. We heard from residents about their experiences and concerns with the region's transportation system and the hopes for its future. In addition to the residents' experiential input, we needed evidence-based information. We analyzed historical data to understand the region's transportation challenges in order to develop future trends and look towards the future. Middle Tennessee has experienced rapid population growth. Each month since 2010, the region adds over 2,000 people. And this trend is forecasted to continue over the next 2 decades. Now, I know we've all been sitting here for a little bit, so it's quiz time. So we're going to pull up another poll everywhere. And if you joined us a little late, the instructions are at the top bar of the presentation. You may either text 22333 and then enter MS or MSkipper 999 or go poll everywhere. And the question is, Metro Nashville, Davidson County has added more people than any other city in Tennessee since 2010. Who is number 2? I'll give you a few seconds to respond. All right, I think we have a very intelligent group with us today. You are all, the majority of you are correct. Murfreesboro is number 2. Would it surprise you to learn that these cities are also listed in order of total population growth since 2010? So all of these are located in Middle Tennessee, except for the last one, Chattanooga, but just to give you a perspective on the population growth. So population growth has occurred in various degrees across the region. Between 2010 and 2019, the region added 251,000 people, which is about a 14% growth rate. The map illustrates the areas in the region with some of the highest population growth. The dark blue areas have the fastest population growth, which often coincides with the opening of the I-840 corridor. But this is not shared equally across the region. So while most of the region is growing, we must also be concerned about the issues that our rural neighbors are facing. Since 2010, rural areas of the region have experienced population loss, mostly due to outmigration and a trend towards more urban living. Population losses in our smaller communities and rural counties mean a decrease in tax base for local governments to provide those necessary infrastructure and services. It also affects the quality of life for our rural families. We must think comprehensively about the needs of urban, suburban, and rural areas of the region in order to build the support for policies that help everyone. The Greater Nashville area, including Clarksville, will be home to more than 3 million people, and forecasts show that our 14-county area will receive more than half the state's entire population growth. And now zooming into the 7-county transportation planning area, and it is anticipated that by 2045, it will be home to more than 2.7 million people, an additional million people over the next 25 years. To put this into perspective, we will be larger than present-day Denver and approaching the size of present-day Seattle Metro. Now, growth in the 7-county area has averaged approximately 22,000 people per year and more than 38,000 jobs per year since 2010, and these trends are forecasted to continue over the next 2 decades. The maps illustrate the change in population density from 2020 to 2035 and then 2045. The higher population density areas, shown in red and yellow, begin to expand and new ones develop in the bordering counties. Future household projections indicate the fastest growing areas are expected to be in counties surrounding Davidson County, further perpetuating the sprawling development pattern in the Nashville transportation planning area. This pattern creates a greater distances between where the region's residents work, live, and shop. Currently, 1 out of every 3 Middle Tennessean commuters works in a different county in which they live. This mismatch between locations of work and home contributes to the region's high daily vehicle miles traveled. So not only are we growing, but our population is diversifying, aging, and urbanizing as we do. So as we prepared a transportation plan, we wanted to understand how and where population growth impacts future transportation. One result is traffic congestion. With the region's rapid population growth, dispersed development patterns, and reliance on personal vehicles, there has been an increase in traffic volume on the existing system, resulting in a 2% annual increase in the duration of congestion. This is the time of congestion for the Nashville area. And traffic congestion is spreading. Not only is the severity of traffic getting worse, but it's also expanding, with more routes becoming congested. Adding capacity, or lanes, to the interstate has not reduced this congestion. The map on the left illustrates travel speeds today on a scale of good to poor, with green being good and red being poor for speeds and congestion. The middle map is the anticipated travel speeds in 2045, and the far right map are the congested routes in 2045. So while we're looking at the transportation network, it's also important that we look at roadway safety as a major area of concern. 1 in every 400 crashes is likely to result in the loss of a life, and traffic fatalities consistently remain around 200 deaths annually for the region. There has been a rise in serious injuries and fatalities on the roadway, especially for vulnerable users such as pedestrians and bicyclists. Pedestrians represent less than 1% of crashes in the region, yet they are disproportionately impacted by them. Pedestrians account for nearly 18% of traffic fatalities and have nearly doubled from 25 deaths in 2015 to 44 deaths in 2019, a 76% increase in fatalities. The roadway safety map is similar to the previous map showing where traffic congestion is because often these are related and/or the cause of the other. This is a transportation plan, but the performance of the transportation system is not all that we looked at. We want to be sure that transportation investments support quality of life, economic growth, and environmental features of the region. The Nashville metropolitan area as a whole is thriving with a 65% increase in gross regional product since 2010. However, in comparison, personal income has grown at a much slower pace, and over 75,000 children live in poverty. We are cognizant that prosperity has been uneven, and we must provide opportunities and mechanisms for social and economic mobility. So as we developed the regional transportation plan, we knew that the loss of affordability and the continued pressures of growth in transportation or growth and development are top on residents' minds. Transportation initiatives must be able to address these concerns. Costal living, once a strength of the region, has increased, partially driven by the cost of housing, with many fearing that they will be priced out of their homes and neighborhoods without an affordable option. By definition, households are considered cost burden when they spend more than 45% of household income on housing and transportation. The average resident in our region now spends 53% of their household income on housing and transportation combined. Transportation investments, if left unchecked, can exacerbate this burden, but if we are intentional and coordinate transportation investments with other community investments, then it can be one of our best tools to help address this growing concern. We recognize the value and unique natural and cultural features of the region and look for ways to minimize environmental impact of transportation investments. The region's rapid growth and development pattern have resulted in loss of tree canopy, agricultural land, and increased pervious surfaces as people and development expand beyond existing urban and suburban communities. Additionally, the region has experienced the impact of extreme weather recently, from the unprecedented flooding in 2010, the March 2019 tornado, and more frequent periods of drought and torrential rain. This is not the only issue that we looked at, but in economic disparities and affordability issues we heard through the process. We understand that there are several other issues of importance that we must be able to address. Issues such as social equity, racial injustice, and concerns about how to pay for the infrastructure that our region needs. As we grow, we are diversifying and aging, with 22% of the region's population being a racial minority, and the senior population more than doubling to nearly 500,000 people 65 and older by the year 2045. It is essential that we have a transportation network that meets all of our needs to access jobs, housing, healthcare, education, and social activities. We are also beginning to track the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the region's transportation needs. With the pandemic, we've seen a shift in commuting patterns with a rise in telecommuting and demand for delivery services. There's also been an increase in bicycling and walking in our communities, and with that, improved air quality. There's been a hesitancy to use public transit, which has resulted in a decline in revenue. There's been a rise in crash severity despite the reduction in the number of crashes. So we must continue to ask how and if these changes in behaviors will extend beyond the pandemic, and how must our transportation system and communities adapt to serve the region's residents. So I want to ask you another quiz. We want to know, which of the following pandemic-induced behaviors do you think will have the biggest impact on our future? So again, you may answer either via text or using the link at the top on another web browser. All right, so it's looked like a widespread work from home employees and an increase in commerce and home deliveries are the largest, but definitely significantly with the work from home. So thank you. So if you're interested in learning more or to see how we develop these trends, there are videos available online. One you might find interesting is a workshop on forecasting. And if you would like to delve into the data, you can access it through our data portal with the links shown below each of these images. So now I'd like to invite Michael Skipper to return, who will present the proposed updates to the Regional Transportation Plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Appreciate that overview of the trends and the plug for the online dashboard. I do encourage everyone to go check that out. So as we get into showing you the proposed update to the Regional Transportation Plan, I kind of want to rhetorically ask, did you know the current plan was adopted in 2016? Often when we go around the region, we hear people say, we wish we had a regional transportation plan. Well, the reality is we've had a regional transportation plan since the early 70s, and it's typically been updated every 4 or 5 years. And so this is why you're very important, because we need to spread the word that there is a regional transportation plan. And it may be that it's not fully aligned with the vision that Middle Tennesseans have, but there's every bit of our being in terms of being open-minded and willing to make sure that the regional transportation plan that's required by federal law is indeed accomplishing the goals that Middle Tennesseans expect. So a little bit about that plan that was adopted in 2016. It accounted for $8.5 billion of expected federal formula funding and the matching dollars to go along with those grants, and represented the collective vision of TDOT, local governments, public transportation agencies, and county highway officials. This plan was shaped through public involvement and close coordination with chambers of commerce, nonprofit organizations, and other interested parties across the region. And if you were to go to that plan, what you would find is that really included 4 key elements. It established a long-term vision for what we were trying to achieve across Middle Tennessee. And that was essentially to create and implement a bold vision for rapid transit in our regional corridors, to create more and safer walkable communities, and to sort of modernize and upgrade our regional interstate corridors through technology investments. And so there's a vision element to that plan. There are also 6 core strategies that are identified in that plan to help achieve those goals over the long term. The plan also included funding recommendations. So it actually allocated the $8.5 billion budget that we expected to have at the time to specific projects across the region. But because that money isn't enough, the plan also promoted a long list of illustrative needs. And these are projects that we aren't able to afford at the given time with the available revenue that we know we need to not lose track of. And so if you go back to the 2016 plan, these are the core elements that you would find. And I say this all today because the update to the plan really is a refresh of the 2016 plan, taking into consideration all the growth and development that has occurred since then, and any shifts in community and regional priorities that have also happened over that course of time. One more thing I want to hit on with respect to the plan adopted in 2016 that sort of is mirrored with the new plan is that the plan was really explicit in defining our goals for our regional corridors. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of those for you now. And in fact, the plan back then programmed about $1.2 billion of investment into the regional corridors so that we were introducing rapid transit and managed lanes to Middle Tennesseans across the 7 county. The biggest project in the plan, the top priority of the last plan, was the idea of downtown, modernizing and improving the downtown interstate loop. For decades, we've spent money widening the interstates that lead into downtown Nashville, but the plan really positioned the idea of modernizing the downtown interstate loop as the top priority to make sure that that antiquated engineering that was done in the 50s and implemented in the 60s and the 70s was keeping up with the investments that were happening on the routes leading to and from it. The plan also specifically identified key upgrades to the South Corridor. We're currently doing an alternatives analysis study to look at the cost benefit of a bus rapid transit, light rail, or commuter rail alternative, and how investments in one of those options might be as good or better than widening the interstate. And so you'll see recommendations from that study coming here early in 2021. The plan also recommended the implementation of transit managed lanes along the region's northeast corridor. And so this would be the corridor extending out of downtown Nashville along I-65 up to the Vietnam Veteran State Route 386 corridor that connects Nashville with Gallatin. And we were lucky enough with the passage of the IMPROVE Act by the Tennessee General Assembly back in 2016 to have that IMPROVE Act really provide a significant boost of funding to help some of these projects get implemented. And that Northeast Corridor is one of the projects that is really shepherded along by the leadership of Governor Haslam and the Tennessee General Assembly. at the time. So that's a look at some of the specific projects that we had scoped out back in 2016. Before I turn it over to Daniel for a look at the proposed update to the plan, I do want to acknowledge, like, it's a tough situation for us to be in online with you. On one hand, we really want to get intimate in terms of looking at the specific projects that are being proposed and get your reaction to those. But we know that would probably be just a really long drawn out meeting. So instead, what we're trying to do is make sure the plan is accessible to you. We're trying to show you where to find it, how to interpret it, and then how to engage us in conversation as you react to the specific proposals that are contained within. So if you don't get all the information that you're expecting from us tonight on specific projects that are being scheduled through the year 2045, it's because we are hoping that you go take a look at what's out there and then reach back out to us to have those conversations. Stay tuned, because before we leave tonight, we will give you a list of dates that we have set aside for small group discussions so we can dive deeper into the weeds on some of the specific recommendations. But with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Daniel Caparella with our Transportation Planning Group, who is standing in for Sean Falzer tonight, to give you a look at the proposed update to that regional transportation plan.
All right, thank you, Michael. Happy to be presenting to you all tonight. I'm a Nashville native, so this is cool to be working on such important work in my hometown. So I'll start by taking you through where you can access the draft plan and documents on our website. So if you go to gnrc.org and you go to Browse by Topic, underneath Transportation and Mobility, there's a tab that says Regional Transportation Plan. So you'll see that highlighted on the screen. So that'll take you to the draft plan and all related documents. You can also go directly to the link on the bottom left of the screen. So some of the things you'll find there are, first, a complete copy of the previous regional transportation plan adopted in 2016, which Michael just mentioned, all of the chapters to the plan, as well as the technical appendices, an interactive map of all the proposed projects for the new plan, and instructions on how to provide us with feedback once you've looked through the plan and its projects. So when you get to the landing page for the plan, you'll see 6 chapters: an introduction, a detailed review of the collaboration that took place during the plan development process, existing issues, trends and forecasts, our policy framework and how our goals and objectives inform the plan, which I'll talk about later, the needs and priorities of the region, plans to implement and achieve our goals and strategies in the plan, and finally, technical appendices that document our assets, project lists, and planning assumptions. You'll also find an interactive project map application of the proposed projects in the plan, thanks to our awesome data team. You can take a look at all of the projects included in the draft plan. You can also view the project locations, the descriptions, the costs, the time horizon that the project is funded in. This application has a couple of tabs across the top where you can view the projects by applicant, by improvement type, and by funding horizon. You can also pull up select layers like traffic congestion, high crash areas, and where the projects are located in proximity to some of the vulnerable populations and environmentally sensitive areas that we looked at. I encourage all of you to check this app out, and the link is on the bottom of the screen. So before we dive into some of the federal requirements, I want to emphasize that this plan keeps TDOT, transit agencies, and all of the local governments in our region eligible for federal grants. So essentially, this plan allows us to fund projects that improve mobility for you all, the people who actually live and use the roadways of Middle Tennessee. So there are a number of requirements that metropolitan areas such as Nashville must meet to comply with federal law. Transportation plans are required by federal law for every U.S. metropolitan area with 50,000 or more people, and the plan must look out at least 20 years and account for all federally funded and regionally significant projects, regardless of implementing agency, whether that be the Tennessee Department of Transportation, any local governments, or transit agencies in the region. Additionally, the plan has to be fiscally constrained and have a balanced budget. It has to address the 10 federal planning factors and national performance-based planning requirements set by the FAST Act, which stands for Fixing America's Surface Transportation. That was passed by President Obama in 2015. And finally, the plan must be updated every 5 years. So the last plan was adopted in 2016, which is why we're doing an update now. Next, I'll go through some of the financial planning assumptions. The revenue projections that we've worked off were based on our grant apportionment for federal fiscal year 2019. And moving forward, we assumed a 2% growth rate annually through 2045. And so the region receives approximately $260 million per year in federal funds. And over the life of the plan, we projected that out to approximately $10.5 billion in total funds, including local and federal funds. So while we know that $10.5 billion sounds like a lot of money to most people, and it is, we also need to understand that figure within the context of transportation infrastructure. So our staff conducted an analysis of peer metro areas, which you see on the screen, who also are required by federal law to produce regional transportation plans. In our review of the 15 metro areas that are on the screen, we found our region at the bottom of the list in terms of the plan's funding levels. So as you can see here, half of the metro areas reviewed had funding levels that are more than twice the per capita rate of our region. Most of that difference has to do with our large dependence on federal grant funds compared with others. So the regions on this list often have additional local, regional, or state dedicated revenues beyond the gas tax. So take Denver, for example. The 1% sales tax dedicated to their regional transit system generates more than $600 million per year compared to just our $260 million our region receives just in federal funding. Okay, so I've not thrown a lot of information at you, so we'll stop here for a quick break. Hopefully everyone is still listening. So you could take a minute to fill out this quick poll. Seeing a lot of A's. Oh, some B's. That's okay. All right, so part of the transportation planning process in developing this plan is figuring out what the region's goals are. So I'll take you through a summary of the investments in the plan. So these goals inform what types of projects are funded. These 6 goals on the screen are the region's most important goals. So maintaining a state of good repair, improving roadway safety, managing the region's traffic congestion, ensuring that the region's residents have better access to economic opportunity, minimizing environmental and other impacts that could be caused by projects, and making sure that our plan aligns with local, state, and national policies. Of all these goals, I can tell you that safety was the most important. So another quiz time. Of the $10.5 billion of the plan, how much of that will it take over the next 25 years to maintain 3,000 miles of major roads across the area in their current condition? It's bigger than you'd think. There's a hint. These answers come in. Looks like, oh, well, tied. So the answer is D, $12 billion. So of the $10.5 billion in the plan, 35% is basically set aside to be awarded later on things like maintenance or active transportation, so things that help improve the quality of our roads. If we look at these investments by funding allocation, which are the categories or groupings of projects, this includes some TDOT maintenance projects and transit projects from WeGo and other transit agencies within the region, and then also buckets of funding for congestion management, air quality, and GNRC's active transportation program. You'll see that more than 2/3 of the investment is made up of Improve Act projects submitted by TDOT. Additionally, half of our funding is going to have to be used on projects from the last plan that we've already been programming. And so the remaining 65% goes to specific projects that are physical improvements on the maps that I'm about to present to you all. So when you all go into the interactive map application that I mentioned at the beginning, you're going to be able to see the projects that are scheduled in our plan, which are the projects that are going to be in the next couple of maps that I'll be presenting. So as I mentioned before, the $10.5 billion total across the life of the plan. This map reflects the share of those projects that have been itemized. So these projects are a smaller share of that investment. This map represents projects by funding horizon. So in our plan, we break up project funding by the short, mid, and long term. So the coloration on the map indicates funding horizon. The darker red, more near-term funding, lighter red, midterm or 2035 funding, and the pink long-term out to 2045, as well as projects that weren't able to be funded in yellow. So this map shows project location by applicant, so who submitted the project. The red projects are projects submitted by TDOT, and the blue projects are projects submitted by local governments in our region. So if you remember the existing conditions that Jessica presented and the region's goal, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to make sure that our money was going towards the areas where we had safety issues. So nearly all of those projects that you see on the map are located in what we've identified as the top 25% high crash areas. And that's defined as the crash frequency over the past 5 years. We also wanted to make sure that our projects are related to solving congestion. So if we look at traffic congestion, approximately 2/3 of those projects are located in the top 10% congested area. We also wanted to look at how the region's projects impact the people who need investment most. So approximately 1/3 of the projects are located in what we've identified as highly vulnerable areas, which are 6 or more vulnerable populations based on the 9 population groups we've identified. We want to improve mobility for folks living in these areas, and so that's what you see on the screen here. Another thing I want to show you relates to the concerns we've had on the impact on the environment. So nearly 90% of the projects are located in close proximity to the environmentally sensitive areas, which is defined by a number of environmental factors that we looked at. And finally, we wanted to distribute the money in the plan in an equitable way. So this is a look at investments by county, and it's comparing where the funding is going by county compared to a few metrics. So we see the percentage of allocated funding by county in the blue, in relation to percentage of population, vehicle miles traveled, and federal aid lane miles, all represented as lines on the chart. So I'll just take a second and hand it back to Michael to finish up the presentation.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thanks for the overview of the transportation plan. Again, I want to encourage everybody to go take a look at it for yourself at the links that Daniel provided. Before we move on in the agenda, I think it's really important to zoom out, and our staff wanted to provide you a sense of the key takeaways from our perspective from this 5-year planning cycle, from 2016 to where we are now in 2021, and sort of how we perceive the plan. Number one, I think it's really important to understand, as Daniel pointed out, that our region is extremely dependent on federal grant programs when compared with our peers. And he mentioned some of the reasons why, which is that a lot of metro areas across America, along with their states, have dedicated revenues from other tax sources beyond the gas tax to fund transportation projects. And that is something that we may need to tackle as a state and as a region in order to get to the same sort of scale of investment that metros across America have to address their transportation challenges. So that's a key takeaway here, is that I think that many people won't see all of the projects that they expect for the region to be working on. And it's in large part due to the funding limitations that we experience here in Middle Tennessee. Another key takeaway is that we sort of want folks to understand that our buying power with the revenue that is currently coming in is dwindling over time. The rate of inflation, so sort of as the construction costs go up as a result of inflationary pressures, as the cost of acquiring right-of-way goes up because of the increase in property values, as that stuff happens at a much higher rate than the growth in revenue, we're losing buying power. So the longer it takes us to implement projects, the more expensive those projects are going to be, which means the less number of projects we're going to be able to get done with the same amount of money. So that's a key takeaway that we want you to understand as you're reviewing the plan. Another key takeaway is that, as Mayor Reed said at the beginning, this plan is really focused on immediate concerns and priorities. And so a lot of the plan, as Daniel mentioned, 72% of the itemized projects are focused on getting those Improve Act projects completed over the next couple of decades, along with the other local projects that are already in the pipeline, already being designed and engineered. So 50% of the plan's investments are going to finish projects that have been identified for the short term. Think about that as you leave here today, that this is a 25-year plan and half of the money is going to finish projects that are really intended to be done in the short term. So I think that speaks to the challenges that we have in front of us. And so we'll have to continue to work with the state leadership, both at TDOT, within the General Assembly, and at the administration level, to identify ways of sort of getting beyond this barrier that is in our way of getting projects done. And I think the key to doing that well is sort of building broader coalitions within Middle Tennessee, better public engagement, closer collaboration with community advocates, developers, and elected officials to build the support for more transformational investment that I know all of you expect to see from government over the next 25 years. So that's a look at how we kind of perceive the proposed plan that is being presented and scheduled for adoption on February 17th. Let me now talk, before we open it up, about a couple of opportunities for continued collaboration among us. So number one, so as you review the plan, number one, reach out to us if you have any questions about it. We are completely accessible to you and happy to meet one-on-one in a virtual way to answer any questions you have. But once you have formed an opinion about the plan, if you go to gnrc.org/RTP comments, you can just make sure we're hearing from you, and that feedback will be presented to the Transportation Policy Board and the mayors that Mayor Reed talked about at the beginning. So that's sort of the number one thing we would like for you to do. Number two is that if you can't stick around for the discussion today, know that we've got 3 sessions scheduled for next week that you can sign up for right now by going to gnrc.org/transportation. You'll see it on the right-hand side of the screen. 3 sessions dedicated to supporting small group discussions of some of the concerns or questions that folks might have about the proposed plan. Again, gnrc.org/transportation. You can follow us. I encourage you to do this right now before you forget, but all the socials, typically at the GNRC is our handle, but you could also find us on YouTube and LinkedIn. And finally, what I want to say is that, transportation planning doesn't stop with the adoption of these 5-year plans. We have ongoing studies for better transit, smarter technology, walkable communities, efficient freight that we want you to get plugged in on. You could also make sure you're paying attention to project delivery. So as projects get designed and engineered, before they go to construction, there is an opportunity for you to make sure that project is the best it can be before the money is spent to get it constructed. I also want to encourage you to engage us through your employer, chambers of commerce, civic clubs, or your favorite nonprofit organization. Some of my favorites are the Nashville Civic Design Center, the Cumberland Region Tomorrow, the Transit Alliance Middle Tennessee, Walk Bike Nashville, Age Well Middle Tennessee, which is just rebranded form of the Council on Aging, and the Equity Alliance. So those are nonprofits that we work with. But pick your nonprofit, a good way to engage us on regional planning issues. And then again, stay connected as we reconvene. And the way that Mayor Reed said earlier is that we know our work's not done, and we update our plan every 5 years. The process to do that will start sort of as soon as we get through, get everybody vaccinated and sort of thinking about transportation again. We really want to sort of reconvene the conversation about what we need to be doing long term in a grand way to address the transportation challenges in front of us.